everyone, and welcome to Metropolitan Museum of Art's lecture series, Museum Passport. I see some familiar faces and some new faces, so I'm very excited. My name is Allison Faddy. I'm the Assistant Curator of Public Programs at the museum, and I have the great pleasure of introducing Jennifer Farrell, the Jordan Schnitzer Curator in the Department of Drawings and Prints at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This is going to be a slightly different Museum Passport lecture. Rather than focusing on a single exhibition or an artist like we usually do, or even an institution, we're getting a look at one of the departments at the Met and an expert in that department, and then hearing from that expert about an exhibition a little closer to home. And you might notice it's this one right here in SVMoA. As Jordan Schnitzer Curator at the Met, Jennifer is responsible for modern and contemporary prints and artist books. She joined the department in 2014 after holding curatorial positions at the Yale University Art Gallery, the University of Virginia, and the Whitney Museum of American Art Independent Study Program, as well as serving as Executive Director of the Nancy Graves Foundation and teaching at Yale University, the School of Visual Arts, and the American University of Paris, and there are more schools. She has curated an incredible lineup of exhibitions, and originally I was going to name all of those, and then realized that was going to take a while, so I'm not going to do that. She's happy to tell you about all of those. At the Met, she's published several books. Again, I was going to mention all of those, but also a very long lineup. And she's contributed to numerous other books. She's authored essays and reviews for a variety of publications, as well as given numerous papers and participated frequently in panels, interviews, and public discussions. She earned a BA from Smith College and a PhD from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and attended the Whitney Museum of American Art's Independent Study Program. Given her many accomplishments and contributions to the field, we are really fortunate to have her with us this evening. We are also grateful to the Jordan Schnitzer Family Foundation for making Circa 1971 possible, and to the Harold and Arlene Schnitzer Care Foundation for their generous support of the exhibition and the robust schedule of programs accompanying the exhibition. There will be time for Q&A at the end, so save your questions for the end, and I will turn it over to Jennifer with gratitude for joining us this evening.
Hi, thank you, Allison and everyone at the museum. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And of course, thank you to Jordan for funding the programs and for this incredible exhibition. It's so great to get to see these works in person together, and they look absolutely fantastic. As wonderful as the slides are, or the reproductions, it's nothing like the real thing, and the way they're arranged. So congratulations to everyone involved in the exhibition. It's a really, really fantastic and meaningful show. So Allison asked me to say a few words about myself. I don't know how exactly to do this. I feel a little bit like a narcissist. So you feel free to ask me anything. I do work at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I've been there about 11 and a half years or so. I'm in the Department of Drawings and Prints. We have roughly half the museum's collection, so we have over 1 million objects. So one thing I tell everyone is that we have about 14% of our department's collection online, because someone is manually typing and entering everything. And as you can probably imagine, for many decades, there were different computer systems. It wasn't all unified. So we tell this because if people have a question or want to see a work or read that something is in our collection and they don't see it online, it very well might be in our collection. So feel free to reach out to us or to let us know. So that also means that there is never a lack of work. We always have something we can be doing. We're cataloging work and adding things. Despite the name of Drawings and Prints, we primarily collect prints and illustrated books. So modern and contemporary drawings are largely in the Department of Modern and Contemporary Art, unless they relate to a print in our collection or a collection that comes in. A few years ago, we acquired the Garfield collection of British modernist work, and there were several drawings for the prints, and then there were a few outside that collection, but we acquired them too to keep them together so that we had one group. So there are some quirks, as any large institution, with where things fall in the collections. But we do also have visitors, so we allow visitors to come in. Any of you can come. You just make an appointment, and you can look at works in our collection, provided they're on site and not in conservation or on exhibition for a time period. So you can sit in front and draw or see several works by an artist that you want to study. So that's something that we do Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. We're closed to the public on Wednesday, and we don't man the study room during the weekend. So that is something that we offer that is a really incredible thing. We're also working very closely with our departments of photography and modern and contemporary art. We are working on a new wing that will involve all the departments and have a much more organic history of art, where all the different mediums are in dialogue with each other and shown together. And that's a lot of what I'll be talking about in the discussion today, is how these artists worked across different mediums and techniques. So I don't know what else I should say. I am working on an exhibition on Paula Rego. She's a British modernist artist. So if anyone has any works by Rego, please let me know. The checklist is not yet finalized, although we're getting very, very close to that. That will be for spring 2028. And that seems like a long way away, but it's really not. Our manuscript for the book is due this March, which means I need to get going. So that is on the horizon, that is coming. And previously I had a show on the artist John Wilson. He was a contemporary with Elizabeth Catlett, and he is one of these figures that was incredibly under-recognized during his lifetime. So it's great to get to see and really go in depth with artists like that. And even Paula Rego, this will be her first show in New York, and she's only had 4 in the United States. And considering she had a career of over 7 decades, that's not a lot of exhibitions in our country. So that's something that I really enjoy doing, in addition to giving a look at artists that people might know and hopefully showing something that's it's new and different, but also artists who they may not be aware of, and some such as Hans Jelinek that we weren't aware of. There's very little written about some of these figures. So that's one of the exciting things with the job that we do. So if anyone is in New York, I encourage you to come visit. So I'm going to start with the presentation. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to return to my bio, but it's not very interesting. And Allison did a really wonderful job. So I was thrilled to be invited to give this talk. Jordan and I have known each other for over 12 years. We met because I was at the University of Virginia Art Museum, then later known as the Fralin Art Museum, and he had a traveling show of Ellsworth Kelly that was at the Detroit Institute of Art, and we spoke to him about it, and Jordan flew us to Detroit to see the show. Ellsworth had a 25-foot print printed by Gemini, so Chris can talk about that when he comes, and there was no way we could accommodate such a thing. So Jordan said, well, who are you interested? I said, how about Jasper Johns? So we worked together on a Jasper Johns show. And many of you may have heard Jordan here, and his enthusiasm and knowledge is unlike anything I've ever seen. So I will just say one thing for the Jasper Johns show, he left it completely up to me. But the first time I met Jordan, I don't think I've even unpacked yet. He said, I'm talking to a dealer later today, so if you want anything by Jasper, let me know and I'll buy it. So that's that's the kind of support that I think every curator would love. And I've written for him, and maybe the editor added a comma, but they don't change. So it's been absolutely a pleasure to deal with the art patron in the best sense of the word. We refer to him as a kind of evangelist for prints, spreading the message. And I think this show really is wonderful for showing a diversity of styles, techniques, and even materials that we'll see. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about, and how artists moved fluidly between mediums, techniques, and styles. And to gather all these works that were made at roughly the same period shows really the vitality of, and this is only America, what was going on in America at this time, we can think globally. So there's a lot of richness at this period. So this also has the idea of artists moving, as I mentioned, fluidly between mediums, techniques, and styles. Of the artists in the show, some were just beginning to make prints and others had a long engagement with printmaking. So much so that with someone like Jasper Johns, by 1971, he was already making prints that would then lead to paintings. So it's a reverse of that common discrimination that prints are just lesser paintings. So there's also the idea, and Chris will talk a lot about it, there's a wonderful person coming from Gemini, about the idea of collaboration and of working together, which is something that print shops do and all these artists did. And the idea of printmaking itself, the idea of reversal, reproducibility, the found image, and experimentation, which is so central to printmaking. So I wanted to start with this piece. This is by John Baldessari. It's on the wall right behind you, and it's on the screen also. And this is John Baldessari, I Will Not Make Any More Boring Art. This was the very first print he made. He made it as a fundraiser for the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design in Halifax. And the origin of the phrase was a sentence that he wrote in his own notebook. About his movement away from the abstraction he was trained in into what he termed the fallout of minimalism. So he wrote it then later for 30 minutes on a video, which it's not, oh, here we go. And so this is for 30 minutes, Baldessari himself writing, I will not make any more boring art. And it's interesting how many times it's repeated because it becomes this kind of very boring thing, and it also becomes this kind of really endurance test. He described it as kind of a vow, and it also becomes aspirational, also punishment. The word boring, I think, is very interesting how he uses it because it shows John Baldessari's sense of humor, but also his directness. And the word boring is often not used officially in regards to art. People will say instead derivative, old-fashioned, repetitious, not new, not visually interesting, uninspired, even dull. The following year, the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design in Canada invited Baldessari to have an exhibition. Baldessari probably didn't have many works at this time, and they also could not pay for him to travel, so he proposed an idea. In a letter he wrote, quote, I have no idea what your gallery looks like, of course, and I know that you do not have much money for shows, so that conditions my ideas, of course. I've got a punishment piece. It will require a surrogate or surrogates, since I cannot be there, to impose punishment. But that's okay, since the theory is that punishment should be instructive for others, and there is a precedent for it. Christ being punished for our sins and many others. Baldessari was going to study theology, so some student scapegoats are necessary. If you can't induce anybody to be sacrificial or take my sins upon their shoulders, then use whatever funds there are, $50 to pay someone as a mercenary. The piece is this: from floor to ceiling should be written by one or more people, one sentence under another, the following statement: I will not make any more boring art. At least one column of the sentence should be done floor to ceiling before the exhibit opens, and the writing in the sentence should continue every day if possible for the length of the exhibit. I would appreciate it if you could tell me how many times the sentence has been written after the exhibition closes. It should be handwritten, clearly written with correct spelling. That's important. He sent around his handwritten sentence as an example. The exhibit was only 9 days, April 1st to April 10th of 1971, so that's crazy. And the students wrote the phrase over 4,000 times, ceiling to floor, and that they did this before it even opened. And Baldessari had even said that anyone who wanted to write the sentence on the walls could do it if they wished, as many times as they want. Later that year, John Baldessari made that video of him writing the text as well as the related print. And the video perhaps can be viewed as his own punishment for 30 minutes writing, "I will not make any more boring art," and perhaps also a public confession. That means he had made boring art in the past. And I think that this also, again, goes to The Simpsons, because you can see this very subversive idea of graffiti like that, drawing directly on the gallery walls, reflected in Bart writing, "I must not write all over the walls as well as on the blackboard." It represented Baldessari's dissatisfaction with his own art, but also the limits of traditional painting. And also he criticized art education, which he felt encouraged students to imitate rather than to experiment and innovate, and the idea of passing on received wisdom. So Baldessari was also on The Simpsons. You can sign John Baldessari, you understand it, you bought it. The white hair is Baldessari, who actually voiced his own lines in The Simpsons, as did Jasper Johns in an earlier episode. So if you Google it, you will see Baldessari talking about art with Marge. Baldessari wasn't at the workshop when the print was made, but he gave instructions to the students and had included earlier his own handwritten sentence. And that was to be included also on the mailed announcement for the show. And you can see his very distinctive script, that some of the lines are longer than others, the slant, and that he did keep the spelling, and he did keep a kind of linear quality, but it's a really incredible piece that he made. And I bring all these things up because I think all of them go together. I will not make any more boring art. In situ piece, the crematorium piece, the print and the video, and that they function differently and independently, but they also complement each other's. And that if we think back to Nova Scotia, that was an in situ piece that was specific to a particular time, place, and context. And by contrast, prints are the opposite, because they're able to be widely distributed, shown at different moments and places, such as here, and someone could have one on their wall in Chicago concurrently. And that they also can be shown at different moments and places. So they're portable in a sense, and as frequently been noted, they're much more democratic. But this idea of going back and forth and seeing how that phrase works in the installation, in a print, in a video, is what others were doing during this time, as well as experimenting with language and performance. And this represents the diversity of works in this period. Now, just to show how others have engaged language, here's Robert Indiana's Love. Indiana is not his real last name, that's the state he's from, he adopted it. Indiana had a fascination with Americana, signage, words, colors, numbers, symbols, and also relates closely to hard edge abstraction. He was close to Ellsworth Kelly, and you can see that with some of their works made during this period of a similar palette and forms. But he also had social and political messages. He embraced screen print, mostly with the flatness, simplified forms, bold colors. And one thing I think that's interesting is that you can see how different Love is, because I had it spread out and here on the wall and in a grid, and they're different configurations. It could be even probably vertically. And that kind of experimentation is something Indiana himself did. He made Love originally as a Christmas card commissioned by MoMA in 1965. But then he experimented with different colors, forms, sizes, mediums, sculpture, for example. Perhaps one of the most experimental people who have worked with language is Edgar Shea. And he's made language, specifically the ways in which words function and appear in various forms and contexts, the ostensible subject of his art. Boucher himself declared, quote, "I like the idea of a word becoming a picture, almost leaving its body, then coming back and becoming a word again." And the words come from different sources, including verbal utterances and declarations, signages, advertisements, puns, and visual descriptions. And by decontextualizing language, Boucher allows it to function as both word and image, making language unfamiliar, even in a sense abstract. So I'm showing you a reproduction or the photographic image of news, pews, pews, brews, stews, and do's. The actual prints are on the wall around the corner, and I encourage you to see that. It's described as a portfolio of 6 organic screen prints encased in a red velvet covered portfolio box lined in beige silk moire with the title sheet printed in black. News, pews, brews, stews, and do's, 6 organic screen prints by Edward Boucher, made in London, editions Assetto, 1970. So these were all made in London from materials that he procured from a London supermarkets and from the Harrod Food Hall. And each word, the word he selected, he associates with England and can also be read as referencing his time in England, including the food. And so news is because, quote, England is a tabloid-minded country. Mews is a word primarily used in the UK to refer to the little alleys. Pews, a reference to the Church of England and Westminster Cathedral. Brews, well, that's obvious, English ales, beers, and stout. Stews, that's, quote, Boucher's idea of British cooking with little rooms, smoking kitchens, and fireplaces. And do's, he was thinking of Robin Hood, unfair taxation, the British protests, Brinston pickle crowd, the British protests also. And what he also did is he talks about making them and the words and of having this kind of wit and absurdity. And the reason is because all of these works, the organic substance, are actually food that he bought. So news, for example, is black currant pie filling with red salmon roe. Muse is made with black currant pie filling, cherry pie filling, raw egg for the lettering, and bolognese sauce. Pews is made with Hershey's chocolate. I don't know why it's not Cadbury. Canned coffee, chicory essence, squid in ink. Brews is made with axle grease and caviar. And stews is made with the kitchen sink. It's made with crushed baked beans, caviar, fresh strawberries, cherry pie filling, mango chutney, tomato paste, crushed daffodils, crushed tulips, and leaves. And stews is made with pickles. And so that's only one. So stews actually has 9 organic substances printed in one run on one screen. Boucher said the pleasure of it is both in the wit and the absurdity of the combination. I mean, the idea of combining axle grease and caviar. Mm-hmm. New mediums encourage me. I still paint in oil paint, but I'm interested in is illustrating ideas. And there's a wonderful image of him actually with the kind of squeegee that you use in screen print, trying to push the beans through the screen print. And I bring up this also because of another connection. This is, here's the background. You can see where he lays out. He's not trying to hide. He's making it very clear what the materials are. And so it also brings up this kind of experimentation with the artist Bruce Nauman and use of language. And you can see the humor, much like Boucher. I don't think it's coincidence that they're both LA artists. But you can see that Nauman was inspired by the shops near his studio, the neon signs, and so he has the true artist helps the world by revealing mystical truths in this kind of circle, and that's, I guess, how every artist would like to think of himself, and that's something that people often think about with artists too. And this is not a unique. And I bring that up because then he also, in addition to making prints during this time, such as raw lettering, and are connected different, he also used his own body. So this is an image of Nauman for the hologram series. And so there are 5 photographs, and he's transforming his own face through stretching, pulling, etc., showing the body itself as a material for art. And as he said, of thinking of the body as something we can manipulate. Now, earlier he had made a hologram series making faces, and you can see the kind of video and movement. And in that case, he actually had these kind of tightly shut eyes and wincing because he has a laser beam that is used in that. So the photographs and then the prints made from the photographs are an idea. It could be more portable. It has a sense of amusement, but it also shows this engagement with new technologies. Now, of course, one of the other artists would be Jasper Johns, as he famously said that he wants to engage objects from everyday life, things the mind already knows, and that printmaking allowed him to explore various methods for encouraging icons and emblems. So souvenir, which I'm showing you now, was something that he made with his own image. That's his face in the bottom next to red, yellow, and blue. And before this, he had made allusions to himself in his own work, in the stenciled lettering, his engagement with everyday objects, and the flashlight. So in many ways, the objects themselves are kind of self-portrait. So he's playing off multiple meanings for the title, the idea of a literal souvenir, the ceramic plate. He purchased this one, I believe, or one based on this in a tourist shop in Japan. And the act of remembering, to remember souvenirs. And so these are heightened by the word souvenir written across the top. And this reflects Johns' desire to play with artists, work from the artist's own studio, a trompe l'oeil effect. At the same time, there's a kind of dehumanization with the pieces. Now, Johns also is associated with the primary colors which he's used throughout his work. And you see that here with techniques and creativity, target. And the target form is perhaps the form most associated with Johns. It was the first print he made, first etching, and it was early works he made in 1955. There's a central motif as both image and an object. And what you can see in this wonderful piece is that it's a kind of paradox. This was, first of all, it was produced in multiple copies, 22,500. And there's a Johns offset on the left, and on the right is a book about an exhibition that maybe Chris will talk about because it was Gemini. And what he's done here is he's created an outline of the target. So he has 5 concentric circles, 3 watercolor pods in the primary colors, and a small red paintbrush affixed to the bottom. And he's actually even signed the work. You can see that at the bottom. And the paradox is the work, in theory, can only be completed when acted upon, when one has done it and signed it. But to do so would also be, in a sense, to fundamentally alter, if not destroy, Johns' piece, because Johns has already signed it, so this, whatever you do would be unknown to him in theory. And you are acting independently. And he gives the participant this kind of power that you can alter. So he left these decisions to the viewer and challenges authorship in a really interesting way, challenging ideas of originality, uniqueness, authorship, artistic skill, and also value, because this was a kind of mass-produced book, so this would be easy to acquire. It was not expensive. And you notice also there's a little humor because the works are dripping almost upwards, they appear. Another artist associated with pop art who was working during this time was Roy Lichtenstein. This is his mirror. And beginning in the 1960s, this really came into his work, and he made over 40 paintings, sculptures, and prints on this theme. This is another work that just doesn't reproduce as well as it looks in person. You can see he's using silver foil and a collage and this kind of embossment, relief, and screen print to provide texture and dimensions. And it's really Lichtenstein approaching abstraction in a way he hadn't before. And you'll notice that the dots and the patterns, his Bengay dots, here are irregular. So they've changed they don't have that kind of standardization perhaps associated with other pieces. So also associated with Jones is Robert Rauschenberg, and this is cardboards. Rauschenberg moved to Florida in 1971, and he chose to use cardboard as his main material because it represented something man-made that also related to consumption, mass production, and overflow. Quote, when I lived in New York, I was used to the richnesses and treasures you could find in the streets. When I moved to Florida, obviously there was not that kind of material. I thought, okay, I'm going to live many other places and can't be depending on the surplus and refuse of an urban society. So what materials, no matter where I was in the world, would be available? Cardboard boxes. It was a sort of practical, rational decision. I still haven't seen any place where there weren't cardboard boxes, even up to the Amazon. And of course, that has double meaning right now, because the Amazon boxes are piled everywhere. So this is one material. So he goes from using actual cardboard to the cardboard that he makes, the cardboards with Gemini. And so he wants this kind of new material of waste that became this kind of joke. So he wants to also break with the work he's making earlier, and that's you can see with the currents of 1970s, right around 1970, 1971. And that's when he was working on politics and technology. These were based on newspaper clippings from 2 months, January to February of that year. And there were 36 collages that were reproduced in another edition work that became a 54-foot print entitled Currents. And he described it as trying to make news more permanent. Quote, I want to shake people awake. I want people to look at the material and react to it. I want to make them aware of individual responsibility, both for themselves and for the human race. It has become easy to be complacent about the world. The fact that you paid a quarter for your newspaper almost satisfies your conscience. Because you have read your newspaper, you have done your bit. And so you wrap up your conscience in your newspaper just like you wrap up your garbage. I made that series as realistically as I could, as austerely as possible, in the most direct way I knew how. Because knowing that it was art, people had to take a second look, at least at the facts they were wrapping their garbage in, end quote. Now, I bring this up because it relates very closely to Robert Rauschenberg, to the work that we have on view here, because while not officially part of the series, they were shown together and he viewed them as being together. So in 1970, Newsweek commissioned Rauschenberg to create a cover that commemorated the 1960s for an issue, and the theme was Goodbye to the 60s. So he used a montage of existing mass media photographs of monumental events and people of 1960s America, such as Buzz Aldrin and the innovation of landing on the moon. A year earlier, Rauschenberg had made the Stone Moon series based on his time working with NASA and at Cape Canaveral. So he actually saw many of these missions. It also includes images of Janis Joplin, Robert F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, as well as images of violence, both domestic, such as the figures who've been assassinated, riots in Detroit, and abroad, such as Vietnam, as well as peace demonstrations. Rauschenberg, it's probably not surprising that Newsweek rejected it. And so then Rauschenberg made it into a print, Signs. And you can see that he showed it with the currents. And he said that Signs was conceived to remind us of love, terror, violence of the last 10 years. Danger lies in forgetting. Now, just one thing to connect with this is that it's interesting to think of Signs because very much about a moment. And at the same time, roughly, he was making the work on Your Right, which is his centennial certificate. And it's a work I know very well because Rauschenberg made it in honor of the museum's 100th anniversary. So this was a celebration. We finished ahead of schedule, it should be 1970. And we looked very closely at it when we were devising the Met 150, which was a portfolio I helped work on celebrating the museum's 150th, which was 2020. So that actually came out in 2021. And in Centennial Certificate, I think it's so interesting because it's very much about a place. You can see these are all images from the Met that Rauschenberg chose, and he actually had people hand sign. Some of the board of directors had to hand sign the writing, the statement. And signs made at roughly the same time as About a Moment. And just as a little bit of background for Rauschenberg's importance of prints, you can see Accident, which is his seminal work made in 1962. Just a few years earlier, he was asked to make lithographs, and he rejected the offer of Tatiana Grossman at ULAE, saying, quote, "The second half of the 20th century was no time to start writing on rocks." So Rauschenberg obviously changed his mind. But I wanted to bring up Accident because it's a little bit unusual, because Accident is just what it says. It was an accident. So ULAE had very little money, and so the stones they had at this time were not the best. And so Rauschenberg created this kind of assemblage of images, and they tried to make the print. He was working with the master printer, Robert Blackburn. We put it in the press, and the stone broke. So that was bad. And then they did it, another stone, and that broke too. And as it's often relayed, that the idea then became to make a print from the broken stone, and you see the kind of gash in the piece, and that Rauschenberg even made a fan of the broken pieces on another stone that he added. So they played up the idea of the accident, of the unintended mark. It's not as sweet a story as it sounds, because his printmaker, Blackburn, was really furious about this, and Rauschenberg also was a bit angry when this happened too. It was more like, when you broke it, you've got to print it. So it had a happy ending, and it's gone down in mythology, but it was very stressful at the time for those involved. And then since that time, Rauschenberg has used cracked stones in other lithographs, so it became something. He even said of stone moon drawing, quote, "Ideas can be cracks in the stone." So it's something he adopted. So just, you can see how printmaking informed a lot of his other pieces. So I see we're running a little late on time. Rosenquist, I just wanted to bring up, was another artist who came from studying fine art, but also worked as a sign painter. He made billboards, and that gave him this kind of bold technical training. He's known for assembling different elements at the time. The Cold Light Suite, which I'm showing you now, is a little different. It's 1971. It was made after he and his family barely survived a traumatic car crash. So it's a much more somber moment. And you can see here that he is also referencing the moon in this kind of bright blue rectangular form, which is a window in this space. And what I think is interesting is if you look at the kind of lines that fill the space, I think it relates very much to Sol LeWitt, who was making wall drawings at this time, the same kind of lines across the surface. And you can see that there's a newspaper there. So you can see, like Rauschenberg, Rosenquist is also bringing in current events and conflicts, as well as the interest in the moon. He actually said that this had a funny story, though, that it was based on a story one of his cousins told, who served in World War II, who was using a latrine and mistook a moonbeam on the floor for a piece of toilet paper and actually tried to pick it up. And he later made a joke, which I'm not going to repeat, about trying to use a moonbeam in such a way. So you can see also, again, the idea of the moon and current events being something that many, many artists engage. So to move quickly to Ellsworth Kelly, Kelly was American, but he trained in Paris. So he has these sharp lines, not hard edge though, but rather influenced by natural forms and architecture and artists such as Matisse. And I think you can really see that with the colored paper and the kind of flatness and the organic forms. And that's something that especially you can see here with the black curve, and I encourage you to see it in person because it has this incredible textural dimension, as does Helen Frankenthaler. This is her one of her prints, and she's best known for her soap stain paintings. She comes of the previous generation, the Abex artists. And so this idea of the aesthetic for how do you translate that into printmaking, and something she didn't believe could be done either. She wanted to translate the spontaneity, experimentation, the fluidity, and namely the fusion of color with gesture. She made her first print in 1961, also invited by Tatiana Grossman at ULAE. These are all New York artists, so getting to Long Island was really easy. As Chris will explain, many of them started working at Gemini once Gemini opened, especially in the winter. Liechtenstein came every February, so LA was very, very appealing at this time. And so you can see this idea of, in this work, a sweep of orange runs nearly the full length of the sheet. It's irregular, it's blurred, and it evokes the watery associations. We think of Frankenthaler, who is known for pouring paint and kind of moving it across the surface, and these gravity-defying stains, as well as her mastery of color. It's a very subtle differentiation between the orange and the pink, and she got that by adding a layer of white in the bottom, and she added green in the upper left. And while many of her works have a kind of little areas of white to differentiate colors and forms, here she lets it bleed into each other. It's one of the few early works where she does this. Okay, just to mention very quickly the color, Joseph Albers, who came from the Bauhaus, been taught at Black Mountain, where he taught people like Robert Rauschenberg, who took his theories but moved them in different ways, and then later at Yale. And Albers, with his idea of color theory, is what he's known, how viewing one color will then affect, having them in close proximity with each other will affect how the other colors appear, the relationships. And making these works, he made a huge number of works in this series, Homage to the Square. And he investigates, he began it in 1949 in prints and paintings, and he is essentially hands-off with this. So he communicated with the printer, so you don't have any touch of Albers' own hand in this piece. It's absolute precision and perfection with the lines and the color and the flatness. And he talks about picking these different colors to come together. And as he said it, and I think it's interesting to think of him associated with Saul LeWitt. LeWitt was known as a sculptor, but he's perhaps best known for his wall drawings. This is a print of his composite series of 1970. These are 5 screen prints among the first 5 abstract prints he made. And they're based on his early ink drawings and plans for wall drawings. And you can see that what he does is he has the structure of the square, but he also creates structures with line and color, so that within a square, he has 4 lines moving in different directions, horizontal, vertical, opposing diagonals, 3 primary colors plus black. And then he has 4 on the top line, and then he has a greater number below, and then merges them until the bottom rung has all the 4 previous bands together with the line and color combinations. So this idea of this kind of rigidity to his work, and I bring this up because you can see it's very faint, but this is actually a wall drawing that he made in 1971. And it corresponds exactly to the print. It's 4 horizontal parts, different number of squares. And so you can think of the difference of encountering it in a print and then encountering it in large scale on the wall. And it goes back to Baldessari also working on the wall, that wall drawings I think can be seen in similar to a print shop, because with LeWitt, he doesn't actually make this drawing himself. Rather, he uses others to realize his vision. He gives instructions, and then others can create it. So I think that's very similar in a way to print shops. Okay, this one doesn't photograph at all, so don't even look at it. It's over my shoulder. That's Annie Albers. That is Blue Meander. And that is a work that we were talking about, basically breaks the camera when people try to capture it. Annie Albers was married to Joseph Albers. They both were at the Bauhaus together and then taught at Black Mountain. And she lectured, wrote, and exhibited often on weaving. And in 1963, she turned to printmaking. And I think you can see, looking at, that's why I didn't show it, looking at her work, the impact of her weaving, the idea of the grid, the idea of the horizontal and vertical, the idea of weaving the forms together, the kind of geometry, the geometric motif she's been using since 1954. These works, her textiles, were very influenced by Peruvian textiles. So it's not just the kind of Bauhaus modernism, they're really, she and Joseph Albers are looking globally. They're very interested in Latin American art. Very quickly, Fred Sandbach is known for making sculpture with yarn. So this is a print based on these sculptural installations where the lines themselves would be these kind of extended lines with yarn, the kind of irregularity, fuzziness that you're to walk through. And I think that also is the idea of the unconventional material. Frank Stella, who famously said, "What you see is what you see." He worked as a house painter after graduating from Phillips Andover in Princeton, but by 25, he had essentially a solo show at MoMA with the black paintings in 16 Americans. And during this time, he is looking at using a single tone, the flatness, the stripe of the canvas, the symmetrical forms, as well as the idea of the unprimed canvas peeking through. And here's an image of how the copper series appeared in paintings from 1960 to 1961. Now the question is how you make that with prints. And so what you can see is that he is using the white of the sheet in place of the wall. So he is also putting them in unusual placements, far to the left, for example, or off center, to play with that kind of optical effect. Now, very quickly, many people look at photorealism as being very different, but I think looking at the structure for Robert Bechtel, you can see him also engaging the grid, minimalism, and even almost a conceptual practice. It almost recalls LeWitt in a sense, with the horizontal structures and the geometric forms, and looking at everyday life, this kind of form, as does Richard Estes. And while these have a kind of photographic quality, it's also playing up illusion versus reality. They usually, in Richard Estes, doesn't have people in the work. And his work really, this is of the St. Louis Arch. This really takes well to screen print because it has not only the flatness, the pure color, but also he talks about layering the different colors and using different screens. And that was his process of working too. So during this time, a lot of people are finding styles that relate to their work. Now, I know that was spoken about, so I just wanted to point out the pencils at the bottom of Hockney's wonderful work. The background, again, looks very much like LeWitt's wall drawings, but you've seen a lot of them today. But that kind of pattern form. So these artists are looking at each other, not that LeWitt has an exclusive on these patterns, but also like John's of showing the materials for art making as part of the work itself. And Warhol also approaches nature, but he is working from photographs. These were flowers from 1970 from a portfolio of 10 screen prints. They were based on paintings made earlier. In 1966, Warhol announced he retired from painting to make films and prints. He published them through his own publishing company, which he called Factory Editions, ADDI. So playing off the idea of editions of what we call prints window multiple. And this was based on a photograph of hibiscus flowers that ran in Modern Photography in 1964. And Warhol, you can see, adopts screen prints because of their irregularities. You can't really see it in the work, in this reproduction, but if you go to the wall, you'll see the colors don't align right. You can see the black and white, and the colors are off register. And that was something Warhol loved, and he did that deliberately. So if someone was a professional screen printer, they would have disregarded, they would have thrown out something that had that, but for Warhol, exposing that is part of the work. And he made it between prints that he made for Campbell's Soup and Electric Chair. So it's a really unusual kind of trio. And you can see they will have Oldenburg moving, the idea of making this the everyday work large and grand and looking at the everyday world, which leads us to our last piece by Via Selmans. And she's looking very closely at the world around her, the most photographic quality of her work. But it's as much about, I think, art making as it is about her subject. Selmans is known for her meticulous drawings and paintings and prints. And so these were photographs she took of the desert, but they also recall the moon. She was very interested in the moon, in the cosmos. She made works named after the planets. She also was a California artist. During this time, she's making images of the ocean as well as the desert, talking about them being connected. She also mentioned she hadn't seen the desert until she moved to California. She's from Latvia, so this was all new to her. And that she thought of the desert as a place where your body had no weight. Quote, at first I thought there was nothing there, then I began to see things. I always think having to adjust my eyes back and forth, both far and close, which I think of how my own work is sometimes. It lies between distance and intimacy. That early discovering about the different kind of space where you don't really know how far or near something is had a great influence on her work. Now, I also think this is something that she's continued as a project into work she's making now, a very limited number of motifs. And so we have the desert, we have the ocean, but this is outside of the parameters of the show, but because we're here with this incredible night sky, I couldn't resist showing Via Selmans' mezzotent, Untitled Night Sky. And so in this case, she's taking an image either found or from a journal of a kind of, of a telescope of showing the night sky and the kind of infinity of the marks. And so for the lithograph, you can imagine each grain of sand, each rock being meticulously created by the artist. And the same way with the mezzotent, which is working backwards. So it's working where the whole plate is inked, and then you mark the areas that don't have the black. And so making these tiny, tiny marks to indicate the stars at different sizes and different scales of brightness. And I think that in many ways, this is a kind of conclusion for the talk, because a lot of these artists continue to make prints throughout their career. People like Selmans and Richer are still making prints, they're active printmakers. And to think of Naumann too, and to think of the different possibilities for printmaking, which I think this show expresses in such a wonderful way. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
How, if at all, is artificial intelligence changing the nature of being a curator and catalog, mass collection? How is it coming into play?
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of the sentence.
How is artificial intelligence, how is it working?
Oh, AI. I don't know. I think that would be a better question for my daughters. I think they know a lot more about AI than I do. I haven't really used it. I don't know if people do. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have experimented with a friend once. We were walking to a train station and I mentioned I'd never used AI, and we were in Zurich and he just said Swiss artist, Marxism landscape, and it came up with an exhibition and a great title actually, and it was really scary how quickly that happened. But that's just an idea, that doesn't mean it's feasible or would happen. But I don't know anyone using it. That doesn't mean that they're not. It just means I haven't discussed it. But I'm kind of a tech phobe, so that's me. Yeah.
Is Jordan Schnitzer still collecting contemporary, really young printmakers, and then say with the Met, are you actively going to shows and looking at young artists and gathering more, buying more?
Yeah, that's a great question. Jordan definitely is. I'd say if anything, he's looking even more and more with very young artists. I mean, young in the sense of like maybe how long they've been exhibiting, because he is. I mean, when he comes to New York, he sees everything. It's absolutely extraordinary how many things he sees. But he's very supportive of young artists, and he can tell you about an artist like Latoya Hobbs, whose work he collected and championed, and has given her solo exhibitions, I believe. And it's something that I think Jordan could speak for it better than I could, but I think it's something he feels very strongly about. And I think that's exciting, and I think Jordan likes the excitement of printmaking. So it's interesting because when I first knew of his collection, it was all the kind of artists that, were from Castelli, Gemini, ULAE. Those are the people I knew. He had others from the Pacific Northwest that, but he is getting moving more and more into contemporary, I think, from what I can see with his collecting. He's also working very closely, at least at Print Fair, with artists on commissions, so supporting them with that work. But yeah, it's exciting to see him doing that, and it makes such a difference in artists' careers when someone like Jordan supports them. And for us, yeah, we definitely are looking at, that's one of the good things about prints, especially prints and drawings, but especially prints, is it's often how contemporary artists enter the museum. And it goes back to people like Bellows and, ashcan artists. It was usually a print that entered the museum first. And we find that time and time again that we're able to do that. And so it's also interesting, I think, to look at artists who maybe are printing their own works, like a group called Dominican York Grafica. We've collected their whole archive, and that's a group of artists that come together and create works, their own works. They print thematic boxes. The Black Women of Print, same. It's a kind of evolving collective of artists who print and publish their own work and then create portfolios. So it's great to see what these artists who are doing from different parts of the country. So yeah, I think it's something that's important to do.
What are some of the other institutions that have very large or investing in contemporary prints?
Well, certainly MoMA. MoMA has a very active prints and drawings department, and the new director of MoMA is Christophe Cherie, who used to be the director of prints and drawings. So that's a good sign for all of us print people that prints will be, works on paper will be given a lot of hopefully prominence. Yeah, the Whitney has a really active prints and drawings collection. A lot of universities and colleges have museums, and they generally do incredible shows. And they have a lot of prints because They're more affordable generally, the budget, but also the fact that they can be kept on site. Like all of our collection is on site right now in my department. That's not gonna last for long because people like Elzer Kelly making a 25-foot print, that's a bit bigger than the Solander boxes. But we are able to keep things on site and show them. And that's something is very appealing to university and colleges, that if someone all of a sudden request something they hadn't thought of, you can get it much easier than having something off-site. And then LACMA and Houston has a great, Boston.
I was wondering about the archival problem of dealing with cardboard or the other materials that are not just ink.
Yeah, that would be, a lot of it would be a good question for Chris, when Chris comes from Gemini. But we do have a team of paper conservators that are right above us in the building. So they are really fantastic at caring for things. And as you can see, I don't know how one would care for organic screen prints with beans as the ink. And an artist like Dieter Roth also is known for like smashing sausage and cheese through without Crochet's precision, just letting it go everywhere. And so there, I did have a former intern who studied conservation later, and she was working on these kind of unusual materials, some like Matthew Barney, petroleum jelly and things like that, how you keep that. And I think she ended up doing her internship at the Museum of Natural History, which is interesting. So that is, I think, an emerging field of how to care for these things, for works that are not the traditional materials. Thank you.
All right, I know there's probably tons of other questions, so let's give her a big applause. And I have to say, she did an amazing job advertising our next talk, which is on September 8th. She mentioned Chris many times. Chris is Chris Santamaria of Gemini Gel in New York, the director. He will be here to talk about the history of Gemini, especially in relation to what you see here. Gemini works with a lot of these artists as well. So September 8th, I hear he's a great speaker.
He's a great speaker and he's an artist too.
So he'll talk, I'm sure he can talk a lot to the techniques and some processes too. So, and then we have our next museum passport. I have to announce it because it's really exciting. September 29th with our own Dr. Courtney Gilbert. She'll be talking about Marcel Duchamp. So please put those on your calendars. Check our website. You can find all of the talks there. So thank you again for coming this evening. I appreciate it.